Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. I don't know if I've ever told you about this, but the ebook is free to download. And I know that you're at home right now under COVID-19 quarantine. You have all the time to read in the world. What a perfect opportunity for you to check out Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. And once you've enjoyed that, come back and see me with money for Banneker Bones and the Alligator People. And coming soon, hopefully June 14th. Move the date just a little bit, although with the way the year is going, we'll play it by ear, but eventually the third installment in the series, Banneker Bones and the Cyborg Conspiracy, will be available. I'm very excited about that. And then under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I write stories for older readers, such as All Together Now, a Zombie Story, my young adult novel, and then the Book of David, which hopefully you know. One thing I did under quarantine, just to keep myself from climbing the walls, is I recorded an audiobook of chapter 1 of the Book of David. The Book of David, of course, is a serial horror novel broken up into 5 chapters. I call them chapters. The 5th chapter is the longest of any of my books. But I did a reading of chapter 1, which hit the feed earlier this week. Hopefully you had a chance to listen to it. If you're interested in adult reading and you've always wanted to hear me use profanity, my God, you have that opportunity. If that's not your thing, no worries. Plenty of past content for you to listen to. But if you do like adult horror stories and you're curious, you can get the Book of David, Chapter 1, read by me for free. Just check the episode before this or check YouTube. You can find it there. Of course, check middlegradeninja.com. And while you're there, read interviews with hundreds of publishing professionals, authors, folks you'll be interested in, as well as you'll get access to the entire back catalog. And we've all got way too much time on our hands right now. Wouldn't you love to go back and listen to all the wonderful authors and literary agents and editors and publicists that I've talked with over the past 2 years? What a wonderful opportunity for you. I am so excited for you, esteemed audience, that you have those shows waiting for you. So that's it. That's plenty. My guest today is literary agent Kristy Hunter. Kristy, how are you today?
Good. Thanks so much for having me, Rob.
I am thrilled that you're making time here in the middle of this pandemic to sit down and talk publishing with me. And I made a note to make sure I do this. Today, Kristy and I are talking on April 9th is when we're recording this. So if you're wondering why we didn't mention the Armada of flying saucers that landed in California, it's because it happened after April 9th and we didn't know about it. The way the news has been moving, I feel it's very important to let you know where we were and how much information we had at the time you're hearing us talk. So that being said, Kristy, how are you holding up under quarantine?
Pretty well. I actually work from home, so it hasn't been too much of a change. I'm used to having, my computer. I have all my files set up. I will say I have 2 new coworkers that are a little bit noisier than normal, so that's been challenging, especially emails are easy, but whenever you're diving into a manuscript, I love just like a chunk of time, and that's been hard. But otherwise holding up pretty good. I mean, considering it's a global pandemic, as good as you can expect.
Next pandemic will be experts.
Yes, I will approach everything differently. I'll be a little bit more organized going in.
We'll talk a little bit about everything. I don't know. It's a conversation. Who knows where we'll end up before we're done? But probably a good spot to start is I am terrible at summarizing other people's biographies. And plus, how painful for you to have to sit through that when you're right there and you know the information. So if you would, please tell esteemed audience a little bit about you and your background in publishing thus far.
Yeah. So I, right out of college, went to the Columbia Publishing course. I really wanted to get involved in publishing. I had never been to New York. New York kind of scared me and also enchanted me. So it was a really great way to get my foot in there, just learn about all the jobs in publishing too, because so often I think people just think, oh, I'll be an editor. What other jobs are there in publishing besides editing? And there's really so many things you can explore. So from there, I interned in Bloomsbury's editorial department. I went to work in publicity at Grove Atlantic, publicity at Random House Children's Book, and then finally I did leave New York and I became an agent, which is where I am now at the Knight Agency.
So there's a lot to unpack there.
Right.
start in the world prior to the big move to New York?
I'm from Cleveland originally. I was in school at Nashville. I did a women's and gender studies major and an English lit major. And through the English lit major, I started to do all these creative writing classes. And at one time I thought, being a writer would be great. And what I realized doing all these workshop classes is that I actually really like working with writers and bringing out other people's stories and hearing what they're trying to achieve on the page. So much more than I ever really liked writing my own stuff or having my own stuff critiqued. So right away I was like, maybe this is something I could do with stories. And I went to the Columbia Publishing course thinking I would want to be an editor, and I ended up having my career, take me in a completely different direction, or completely is probably a strong word, a slightly different direction from there. But yeah.
So just curious, because I'm, very egocentric. I just recorded my own audiobook. Wouldn't you like to hear my book read by me? But when I critique, it's usually because I know that if I give you great advice and help you, one, that's going to help me write better because I'm going to learn from your mistakes. You, in this case, being any writer I've ever critiqued. But really, I'm looking forward to that receiving back on the payback. I want to see your notes for my manuscript. So when did it occur to you that it's just more fun to give than to receive, as it were?
Pretty early on, I just really love looking at a story, looking at characters, really digging. People will always say that I ask so many questions, like in any given situation. I'm like, what happened? And people are like, that's too many questions. But when you're an editor, that's exactly what you're doing. You're asking all these questions and really getting to the core and making sure what the author sees is what's coming through on the page. Because that's sometimes the hardest thing. An author may have an idea in their head, but it's not translating. And that's what I really get to do and what I really loved in critiquing and what I still get to do as an agent.
So when did you decide that out of the different jobs you attempted, because you were an editor, you were a publicist for a couple of different places, when did you say, the light bulb goes off, literary agent, that's where it's at?
I always was from the Columbia Publishing course. I actually originally thought how great an agent would be. I loved the idea of working on contracts, being an advocate for authors, being able to do some editing. What really made me nervous was it's a commission pay, and I was in New York, and that's a hard city to be on a commission pay. So right away I wrote it off. And it wasn't until I was looking to move out of New York and really stay in publishing, I was like, maybe this is an opportunity to pursue this job that I've always wanted and have been kind of scared to do. So it was really great to move to Atlanta and be able to join the Knight agency. I've liked all my jobs. When you're working with books, you're working with books, which I think is a joy in itself. Publicity, I think you get to be really organized, you get to be really creative, and I love that. But for me, agenting kind of involved everything. It's editing, it is, publicity and reviewing publicity plans. And I kind of like that it did incorporate so much. But it was a risk. It's always scary it's a hard job and it's a hard market, and it's hard being in New York doing this kind of job that isn't salary structured like some of the others at publishing houses.
Well, that's something that I'm a little bit hopeful. I've been banging this drum for a while. Esteemed audience is probably tired of hearing me talk about it. But I want to see publishing decentralized out of New York. And I'm hoping that one thing out of coming out of having so many people suddenly working remote out of the office is they'll enable these workarounds that publishers don't have to spend the tremendous amounts of rent to be in the most expensive city in the world, that they can move out to Indiana, or Atlanta. So having worked both in New York and now doing this in Atlanta, what are the big differences? Are there things that you're not able to do in Atlanta that you would only be able to do in New York?
I don't really think so. The world has changed so much in terms of technology. So much is online, so much is done by phone calls and email in a way that business used to be more face-to-face. I will say I go up to New York a couple times a year to get those face-to-face meetings. I personally love them. I don't think you need to have them. I think a lot can be achieved, by a phone call. But I always say, agents in New York, they maybe do a lunch a week, a lunch here. My schedule is like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., coffee, lunch, coffee, drink, coffee. So I kind of just pack my little FaceTime visits a little bit closer together. But I think, thanks to technology, you really don't need to be anywhere. So it's really interesting what you're saying, because I think what a lot, publishing is trying to get these new voices in the door. And a lot of it is these economic barriers of how expensive New York is. To be able to expand it to other cities would be really wonderful. And I think, we're getting to the point where we probably have the technology to make that happen.
Yeah, why not? Why couldn't you be in my hometown of Lebanon, Indiana? Population, I think of the time I lived there, less than 30,000. You could go sit. We didn't have a Starbucks. We had our own special coffee place that was a mom and pop shop. Why couldn't you sit there with a laptop and be every bit as connected to the world as somebody in the bustling crowd?
Yeah, I think it's entirely possible now, which is great. I love it. I mean, New York is my favorite city, but I kind of feel like I have the best of both worlds. I have Atlanta, and then when I go, I get to see my editor friends, my publicist friends, and, kind of have it both.
So I've heard a lot about the Columbia Publishing course, and I'm automatically just a little bit jealous of anybody who got to take it. I guess it sounds fantastic. What was that course? What did that entail, and what was that experience?
Yeah, that was great. Gosh, now it feels so long ago. I did it in 2010, so 10 years ago. And it's 6 weeks, and you kind of just get to hear from all these fantastic publishing professionals, like the big names. And you get to kind of see what day-to-day life looks like in a publishing house. Like I touched on earlier, you get to see the other jobs, because obviously there's so much that goes into a book, not just editing to make it end up on the shelf. So you get that kind of global overview of what to expect at a publishing house. And then for me personally, I got to meet so many wonderful people who would go on to work in the publishing industry, which was really nice. When you're moving to a new city, it can be kind of intimidating. And right there, you have a wonderful friend group with a very central interest of books. So I felt really fortunate. And you just get to know New York a little bit. If you haven't been to New York, it can kind of be, I'm from the suburbs of Cleveland, so it was kind of a different beast for me. The subway, I'd never really done public transportation, so it was all kind of overwhelming. And you stay in these dorms in Columbia, so it's kind of a great way to like dip your foot into New York if you haven't spent there instead of just diving in. At least for me, it was.
And then I love age and horror stories, or anybody in publishing. Were you able to get a studio apartment just for you once you left Columbia, or were you doing the roommate scene?
I had a roommate. Actually, it was really funny. It was someone I knew from college, and I had this laundry list of everything we were going to have in our apartment. I was like, it needs to be at least this big, and it needs to be close to a grocery store, and I'd like this. And he's like, okay, that's not what you're getting. You're getting a hole in the wall, and you're going to love it, and that's all we can afford. And I was like, oh, okay. So it took me a little while to realize what it would look like. It was a pretty gross apartment, but it was wonderful too.
And now you're in Atlanta, so has the Knight agency there? They're just outside of Atlanta, right?
Just outside. So I'm in Atlanta, the city, and then the Knight agency is located in Madison, Georgia, which is about an hour east of here.
And we're gonna talk about all over the place a little bit, because I've got lots of questions. I want to talk with you more about being a publicist as well. But you know what? Well, let's get to the Knight agency. Let's start there. Tell me a little bit about the Knight agency and why it's the best literary agency to be representing everyone listening.
Oh, great question. Well, the Knight agency started in 1996 by Deidre Knight. Of the Knight agency, and that's why we're located in Madison. Deidre lives there, and we have a separate office there. And it's really just a great agency. It's grown so much. We now have 9 agents spread all over the U.S. And what I liked about it is I had kind of heard of the Knight agency even as a publicist. One of the agents on our team had a few books at Random House Children's Books when I was a publicist. And it just had this great reputation of being respected. We work with great foreign agents. We work with film. We do audio. But at its core, it kind of has this family business, really collaborative feel. And that translates into how we navigate our authors' careers. And I just love that. I love, part of the reason I got into this was because I wanted to help authors reach their goals and help them, navigate. And Knight Agency takes a really hands-on approach to that, which kind of mirrors what I like to do with my clients.
So how, because I know that you were mentored by Deidre Knight, right?
Yes, I was.
Did you come from publicist in New York to saying, yes, Deidre Knight, I'll follow you anywhere. Here I'm coming to Atlanta. When did you get involved with the agency?
I had moved out of New York. I'm trying to think of the timeline actually, but I took a brief stint. I left publishing. I was like, there's no way to make money in publishing. And I realized how much I missed it. And so I got this email that they were looking. I had already just moved to Atlanta and actually thinking about moving back to New York. This is kind of a convoluted story, I guess. And I got this email and it just felt serendipitous that I had really was trying to figure out a way to make publishing work against all odds and to have this opportunity potentially land in my lap. So I did. I emailed Deidre and we met right away. And she was just wonderful. I loved the Knight agency. I was so excited to mentor under her and just learned so much when I did.
Well, now I've got to ask you a couple of questions about.
I know. I was like, so I was here.
Well, I'm always curious for folks that imagine they can, because I have this probably overly optimistic view that almost nobody really gets into publishing for money. I'm sure they're out there. I just haven't really encountered them. But most people that don't say, if they say, oh my God, my goal is money, I should write a book. That's not, that's not a logical through line. So when you're thinking, I'm done with publishing, I don't want to do this anymore, what was your next choice? What could you see yourself doing outside of publishing?
I did PR briefly, just straight PR. It was a really grueling job, actually. And I did like it. It was cool. It was a lot of tech PR. And for the most part, I enjoyed it. But I just realized how much I liked working in books. And it really had nothing to do with being a publicist, because a lot of those skills transferred really easily. But I was like, I really just want to work with books again. So like I said, I thought about moving to New York and was just like, you know what? I'll just move to New York. I'll live in a little shoebox forever and it will be fine. That's just the way my future has to go. So be it. Goodbye, having an affordable lifestyle in Atlanta. And I think I had decided, and like pretty much that day got an email about the job from the Columbia listserv of this job in Atlanta. And I was like, this has to be this is it. This is what I have to do. So that's kind of how. And I think it was really only within 2 months of moving to Atlanta. I'm trying to remember the timeline because I've now been with the Knight agency for, I think, 6 years. So this was a while ago. But trying to remember how.
Do you remember what you had for breakfast?
Yeah, I'm like, and then I committed a murder, and then I'm trying to think how this all went.
Well, that's the juicy scoop.
Did you tell everyone it's 8:45 at night? I feel like that's important information.
Well, that I think speaks very broadly for your capability and your passion as an agent. Kristy Hunter, so passionate she will kill for you. So we'll put that out there.
Right.
What was the fun of being involved?
I just think it's an amazing thing. You can shape what people have access to, and it's so important right now. I think for so long in publishing, people thought that white men were the only people putting out worthy material, and that's not the case. So I really books have always had a special place in my heart, just the ability to escape through them in any given time. So I just like being part of that process. I think it's a really special one.
Well, let me jump ahead. This is a question I feel it's only fair to ask every publishing professional I ever talk to, so I try to be real consistent and make sure I ask everybody. We had Lamar Giles, and I never get tired of bragging, that Lamar came on a few episodes back. Check the back catalog, esteemed audience, well worth your time to listen to. He, of course, was one of the founding members of We Need Diverse Books, which exists because we need diverse books. And we are getting, I like to think publishing is getting a little bit better, but still a long way to go. So what are you seeing being done to increase diversity offerings in literature? What are you doing? What is the Knight agency doing?
So that's a really good question. I think, you're seeing more diverse books being published and just people not being roadblocks. I mean, that's step one, right? And then I think step two is realizing that publishing in itself is, and by that I mean the people who work in publishing, are not that diverse, and that really hinders how you can acquire these books. So I think what you're seeing is figuring out a way to really support people of color working in publishing, and that starts at the ground level. And what I've seen, we talked a little bit, New York is so expensive, and a lot of times getting into the publishing, there's this expectation that you'll have these internships that you're essentially working for free, but living in New York at a high cost. And so I'm seeing more paid internships, which I think are helpful. And I heard more discussions about remote internships, which I think are also really, really helpful. And then in terms of me, I just really believe in these stories, really seeking out these authors. There's so many great ways to get in contact with these authors. DV Pet is coming up, which I'm always really excited to participate in. And I think also just putting out a message that these books are so important and that publishing is hungry for them. That's something that I noticed when I'd go to conferences. When you're in publishing, you're in this bubble and you think everyone knows what you know. I'm seeing on Twitter these calls for diverse books, that publishers are more open to it, but that doesn't always spread throughout, beyond our bubble. And so talking at conferences, I still get questions, my main character is Black. Is that something that publishers even want? And you're like, oh my gosh, yes, of course. And you realize there's just so much damage done that you have to undo to make sure these writers know that they are supported and that their works matter.
Yeah, no, it's an awkward position, not you personally, but that publishing finds itself in. Like, hey, we're trying not to be racist anymore. Just ignore most of our history.
Yeah, just forget that. We're on a new page, But I mean, truthfully, yeah. I mean, I think there's a long way still to go, as you said.
In fairness to publishing, they are hardly the only American institution of which that is true. So just
absolutely. Right. Media, I think just in general, and, movies are seeing a change too, which has been great. But yeah, lots of industries are guilty for sure.
Excellent. So I'm glad that you're in the fight. Knight, this he's in the fight, going to do all right. So let's skip over New York then, and let's get to what does being mentored by Deidre Knight look like?
Oh, well, that's a really fun thing to have. Deirdre is just incredible. She's at her core an amazing salesperson. I think that was one of the things I picked up the most about her. When she's passionate about something and talking about a book, you just have to have it. Like, she's amazing. But I felt really fortunate working with her. I also worked with Elaine on foreign rights. I worked with Deirdre just seeing her contracts, her deals, her day-to-day. And then starting out, I was also our submission coordinator. So I'd see every submission that came in and vet it before it went to any agent. This was a pre-query manager. We now use query manager, so all agents just get their own queries. But before that, I would read and respond to every query. And that just kind of laid my foundation. I now have my own list of clients, obviously. But that gave me a bird's eye view of everything I would need to know to be a successful agent. And it's just, Deirdre's the best. She's just the best to learn under.
For those of us that haven't had the experience, what is query manager versus a submission coordinator?
Oh, okay. So that's a great question. So when I was a submission coordinator, things would just go to like a regular email box. It was submissions@knightagency.net. And I was, just a normal human, would go through everything and respond or forward it to agents. Now there's this computer program, I guess, called Query Manager that a lot of agencies use. So you're uploading things as a form. So each agent has their own portal you can upload your query to, and that's checked directly by the agent. So no longer am I needed to respond, because we really pride ourselves on responding to every email, but now thanks to Query Manager, you can use a form, whereas before I would actually take the letter, write in the person's name, send it on, via email, but it was all done without using a computer program. So Query Manager is much more efficient.
Well, I saw you guys are bragging on the website, not bragging, but stating on the website that you will have about a 2-week turnaround time to get back to the querier.
Yeah.
I was just drooling over, oh my God, because I'm an old man. I did this back in the days of the self-addressed stamped envelope. So 2 weeks, what privileged writers are about in the world now, really getting turnaround that fast. So does the query manager do things like flag emails where somebody's, spammed every agent within the agency with the same query?
No, we still just read everything. There's no sort of shortcuts or anything like certain things are going to trash automatically. There's none of that. We just really pride ourselves as an agency. As an agent, personally, I love when people get back to me. So we try to extend that same courtesy to authors. 2 weeks is kind of like, I would say, our goal. I'm sure I've had times where it's been 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but I definitely set that goal for myself.
The author is listening right now. Like, 2.5 weeks. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. I do it in batches, and I've definitely have gotten feedback sometimes when something has fallen in that day, and I'm doing the full batch, and they'll be like, they had my query for 3 hours and they responded. I'm like, I read it. You were in that batch. So you kind of can't win, because I think there is the thought if you read too quickly, you're not maybe giving full consideration. And, that's just not the case. We just really believe that submissions are important, that cultivating new talent is important. And because of that, we don't want to leave authors just wondering. We want to give them a definitive response whenever it's possible.
So how many queries are you receiving on an average day?
For me, I probably get about 20 a day. I'm a newer agent. I know when I was doing the submission inbox, some of our more senior agents see a lot more.
Gotcha. So you've got that seasoned experience that you know how to tear through an inbox pretty quickly, right?
Yeah. So I think the submission coordinator kind of set me up for that, because I would go through everything, and you just learn to see really what works. And, we ask for sample pages, so there's always that opportunity. If the query sounds interesting, but maybe it's just a little discombobulated, I go straight to the sample pages and see what we're working with. So just that kind of like, let's see kind of mentality.
So, okay, brand new submission hits the inbox. What are you looking at first? How are you evaluating it, and how quickly can you do it?
Yeah, I usually pretty quickly. First of all, I'm looking just to make sure it's something I represent. Sometimes I just get queries that aren't even what I represent. So that's an easy, fast no. I don't do picture books. I only do a certain genre of adult. I do really just women's fiction and rom-coms at this point. So that kind of helps me weed things pretty quickly in that regard. Then I'm looking just at the basics. If you're writing middle grade, what is the word count? Is it 200,000? That's going to make me be like, oh, I'm going to have to really love this story to take on a 200,000 word middle grade and get it in shape for submission. So those are things. Would
the sample get a look? Even at word count?
200,000 might be aggressive. I'm usually one who will be generous with large word counts, because I kind of feel like we can always whittle it down. To that 100,000 obviously is a little bit crazy for that regard. But I'm looking at that, and then I just, it only takes me a second. A query should probably take up about 3/4 of a page. It doesn't need to be long to be well written. So that only takes me a few seconds to review and know, what's the hook? Is this something fresh? Is this something that makes me excited to read on for the sample pages? And it's just something I like, because as an agent, I sometimes see projects that I'm like, ooh, this is good, but this isn't for me. I'm not going to be the right agent for this. And so I think kind of that's the hardest one, is when something's good, but you're not sure you're the right person for it. But just kind of trusting your gut. That kind of helps me make the fastest decisions. It's just do I feel that spark or do I not?
Well, without boring folks too much, because I know we've always got a nice mix listening to the show. Some folks that have just wrote their first query or are about to write their first query ever to you, and folks that have been on I call it the query go round, which is a fairly common phrase, for years, and they've got this down. When you're looking at a query, how would you prefer that open? You want to hear about the author? Do you want to just straight to the pitch for the story? What would you like?
Pretty much straight to the pitch. Sometimes I see people lead with this is a YA thriller and this is the word count, and that's fine. That doesn't really bother me either way. That can sometimes come at the end too. But I think beginner authors sometimes make the mistake of front loading too much about themselves. This is a story I've been working on for 10 years. It's this, it's that. I worked as a fisherman, and it's just really what I need as a good story. That's the most important part. So as fast as you can get to what your story is, what is the hook, that's better. That's ideal, because, like I said, I go through so many. I don't really have the time to kind of sort through the information. So if you can write it in a concise way, And there's so much great information out there about doing strong queries, but so it's definitely doable. But that's the best way to do it and helps me evaluate your project.
Do you want to hear how I learned about you? I heard you on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast. You sounded fantastic, so that's why I sent you my query. Or just get to the pitch. I don't care how you heard about me.
That's fine. And if there's a relevant information, like I do, I'll put out tweets with the MSWL hashtag every so often, like looking for this, looking for that. And if people see that and they feel it's relevant to their work and they want to reference it, that's great. I never hate when people do their homework. I think if it becomes a stretch for why you're, like if my MSWL said something very specific and you reference it and then your book has nothing to do with that, I wouldn't stretch the connection. It's okay if there's not a connection, but if there is one, or if there is a specific reason, you love my author's work and your project's similar, feel free to mention it, but I don't think you have to fabricate something to get an agent's interest.
I understand you're looking for rom-coms. The protagonist in my political thriller loves rom-coms also. So.
Right. Well, you'd be surprised that people will make that stretch. And I think it comes from the idea that, agents aren't actually reading their queries, that they're just kind of like you said, flagging certain things. And I read every single query. So there's no reason to try to trick me into opening it. I'm going to open it.
It's April 9th. So as of April 9th, 2020, what sorts of projects are you looking for? What are you hoping shows up in your inbox?
Oh, that's a great question. I think right now I'm pretty open to anything. What I keep saying is I just need an escape. I think we all need that right now. Just like that wonderful read that just kind of pulls you in and you're just there. You're in that different world. It doesn't let go. It's a great voice. And so that can be anything. I represent middle grade, YA, and adult. So right now, anything. Give me that read. I'm reading submissions, and for me, work is a great escape, and submissions are a great escape. So I'm just looking for that good story.
So you find yourself reading even more now that we're avoiding the news and all sorts of unpleasant thoughts that might come while we're in quarantine?
Yeah, I mean, for me, reading's, I think that's probably one of the reasons I've always liked books. I think reading is such a great escape. You just really get sucked into that world. So yeah, I'm definitely reading submissions, reading regular books as much as I possibly can with the new situation. It's definitely some of my submission reading time has been interrupted with the new flow of things, but still doing a lot of reading.
See, I had read something in your request that I wanted to make sure I wrote it down because I wanted to make sure I asked you about it. I know that you're a big fan of fantasy type stories. I'm assuming that's still true.
Yeah.
And you had said that it was, what was it, atmospheric fantasy specific that you're looking for? Is that the atmospheric setting? A fantasy with a wonderful atmospheric setting. And I thought, okay, what is an atmospheric setting? How am I gonna turn your head with this?
For me, so this is probably subjective. So this is my definition, and so people may debate it, but I'm just looking for the atmosphere to really be part of the character. Like it's just this pervasive, almost it sets the tone of the story. The atmosphere is so rich. And specifically for me, my favorite books are kind of like sweater weather reads. Like I picture myself on like a coast, in a cable knit sweater and tea, and that's kind of the feel of the story. One of my favorite books, Songs from the Deep, which is Kelly Powell, which is one of my clients, and her story came from that, and it's set on a fictional island called Twillingale, and it kind of has that kind of Irish coast feeling. And as soon as I got that submission, I was like, I'm sold. Like I can't get enough of that kind of setting. So for me, that's always something I'm looking for.
So Irish coast, huge plus. If you've got it
doesn't have to be Ireland, but that kind of, that kind of misty, miserable, it kind of has this anything can happen kind of atmosphere. It's just kind of dreary. I love it. I live for it. Maybe because I'm from Cleveland, which is like kind of a cold, dreary place in itself. That's my comfort zone. That's my happy place. So I like stories that kind of take me there.
And if you've got a fantasy set in Cleveland, well, for sure.
Who wouldn't want to escape to Cleveland, right? Or vacation. I'm I'm sure everyone's hoping to go there when the pandemic is over.
And then, well, I'm always curious with setting. I guess it's one of those things that's going to depend on what the type of story is, but how much time being spent on setting is too much time?
It's really going to depend on the story. If it's a fantasy, world building is going to be really key. If it's, a rom-com, you can kind of maybe set the mood and people know. So I think there's no right answer for how much time needs to be spent on the setting, but it needs to be enough that the reader can picture themselves there easily within the pages.
No, I want you to tell me the exact number of sentences to write, and that's what I'm doing from now on.
I'm going to need 2 solid paragraphs. No.
Perfect. And then, what is it that attracts you to fantasy and magical realism?
I think it's just the escape. That's kind of fun. So much, especially now when you're going about in day to day, is very stressful, and sometimes there aren't easy solutions. To have these kind of fun, magical solutions or magical problems can be kind of refreshing. I just love it. It transports you. And I'm someone who grew up, I think I was 10 when the first Harry Potter came out, and he was 10. And, that was a book that is, for so many people, played such an important part of their childhood. But I would, each year get older, and so would Harry. And that kind of maybe first made me really love magic and that escape.
And did you read the first book when it came out?
I did, not right away. I think it was maybe a few months later. It had already become a thing before I picked up a copy. But yes, I did. I loved it.
I remember when I read it, I was in college, and the 4th book had just come out because I was waiting tables away from classes, and I had 4 kids come in, and they all had Goblet of Fire, and they all sat there reading it while their parent just ate and talked to me because the kids weren't talking. What is this book? I have to read it immediately. And then I went home and ate my heart out because, oh my God, why am I trying to be a writer when this exists? And then something else she said, this is another impossible question. I specialize in
no.
But you say that you're looking for voice-driven stories, and I'm always looking for that vague, nebulous definition of author voice. What advice do you have for authors that are looking to cultivate the sort of voice that will drive a story?
Oh, that is that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Because if there was just one way to do it, my job would be so much easier. I would just tell everyone the secret and then sign everyone, and my job would be done. But I think really to get that voice, it's tough to capture on page, but I think it's also really just knowing your character so well that really the devil's in the detail, and how a character describe things and see things and perceive things, little slights. You just know your character so well that you're always in his world or his eyes or her eyes, and it just informs every decision. And I think when authors are really able to do that, it makes the character come more alive on the page. And it's hard to do, but I think it really starts with knowing your character and really spending that time to build this character out in your mind.
Makes sense to me. When you work with your clients or whatever writers you happen to be working with, do you recommend some specific things that they can do to strengthen their characters and strengthen their voice?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends. Each client and each manuscript is different, but I do always recommend, knowing your character and spending enough time to see how they would handle each situation. Even secondary characters, I think that's where voice really matters. Is I think a lot of people can develop their main character, but where the story starts to fall flat is these secondary characters are just caricatures. And so really making sure that no matter how minor the role someone might play, they need to be fully fleshed out.
Gotcha. So the example I always use when I teach in class of the ideal secondary character is Detective Kinderman in The Exorcist, because a fun fact that I'm a nerd, so I know William Peter Blatty sold The Exorcist as a film before he sold it as a book. And the film ended up being delayed, but they liked the Detective Kinderman so much they spun him off into his own television show, which became Columbo. So I always say, write a secondary character so great that it could sustain multiple seasons of television on their own.
Exactly.
And then let's who are some of the clients that you've worked with so far?
Yeah, well, L'Oreal Ryan, who is fantastic. We were talking earlier, but she has her book that just came out this Tuesday, Into the Tall, Tall Grass. It's a magical realism, middle grade story. And it's just, I mean, it's fantastic. That is a story that its initial pages just blew me away. You're seeing the main character, Yolanda, walks in, and her grandmother is sick, and she has these beautiful butterflies just nesting in her hair. And it's just such a rich image, and it raises so many questions in my head, and she's just really a fabulous author. I also work with Kelly Powell, who we talked about, who Songs from the Deep, and she has her next book coming out with Simon & Schuster in 2020. And she's just gorgeous writing, atmospheric setting. I also work with Lizelle Samberry, who her debut fantasy, A Black Witch's story set in a futuristic Toronto. So it's very fun. Very, very interesting. It's coming out with Simon & Schuster as well, and that's coming out in 2021. But again, very different voices, but all really strong, unique voices. And pretty much that's what really captured me for each of those authors.
Let's move past the initial query stage. Okay, so you get my query and you say, oh my God, this is the most wonderful query I've ever read. I must reach out to this author immediately. How would you reach out to me to talk about the book, and what would the next step be from there?
Yeah, so if I like the query, then I request the manuscript, and I also usually request the synopsis right away too. I just love synopsis. It just helps me kind of, when I start to see an issue maybe in the manuscript, if I can refer to that and see maybe what you're doing and what's not translating, that can be helpful. And then, I start reading. And if all goes well, I finish it and I love it. And then the next step would be, I will email you and say, I love, love, love your manuscript. I would love to hop on the phone. When can we do that? And then we kind of go from there.
So if I send you my manuscript, I'm sure this is subjective depending on what you've got going on with all of your other client load. But how long can I expect to hear back from you?
That is a great question. It can be anywhere from like 2 days to I try to respond to everyone within 4 months. So it kind of varies. And a lot of times I know authors can overthink being like, she signed that person after reading, the manuscript in a night, and she's had mine for 2 months, she must not like it as much. And that's not really the case. A lot of it has to deal with what, life and work and where I'm at. Sometimes things just hit my manuscript, my inbox at the right time, and I can just download it and read it that night. And then sometimes, I have client work and it can take a little bit longer, even though I'm just as excited to read it. But I do try to get back to everyone within 4 months. I would say average time is 2 months would be my average.
Gotcha. So you read my manuscript, and what if it's pretty good, but not quite great? But you can see potential in it. What happens then?
It kind of depends. It depends what the concept is. If I'm just so in love with the concept, I'm like, you know what, we can make this work. If there's a question in my mind, if I can make it work, I do sometimes offer a revise and resubmit, and I will highlight in an email where I could see corrections and then see what you come back with, and then I can kind of go from there.
Gotcha.
But I do take on most projects. I never take on a project thinking there's going to be no edits. No project is perfect. So it kind of just depends how many edits, and if I feel like I have the fix for where I'm seeing the problem. Sometimes you'll see a problem and you're like, what can we do? What can we do? And then sometimes it's so clear. And that's kind of how I know when I'm the right person for it, if I feel like I have the what is needed to make it a stronger story or convey the author's vision. And that's more confirmed, though, when we hop on the phone or chat further.
Okay, so if we have our conversation and you say, hey, I'm thinking maybe we make some of these changes, and I say, heresy, madam, this is the most perfect manuscript. The divine voice of God told me this manuscript. We can change not a word, then that's probably going to be a short conversation.
Depending on where I see the issues, but probably, yeah, that would be a hard Because even if I was okay with that, it's going to be a hard sell to a publisher that you've printed it as is.
Well, no writer is smart enough to listen to this show would ever yell heresy on a phone conversation with agents.
Yeah.
So when that phone call happens, what are you looking? How does a successful version of that call go?
I think there's a lot of stress that there's like this one way to do it, or you're trying to win me over. And really it's just a conversation to see what the author's goals are, where they see the manuscript. And I always, when I offer representation, go into fair detail about where I see edits and the scope of the edits. If I think it's a few rounds, if it might be something more intense, just to make sure our visions are aligned. And that's something the author would want to do. And I think just kind of get a feel of where they see their career going. I sometimes like to hear what the next project is, because as much as possible, I like to be a career agent. And so that sometimes helps me kind of see where they see themselves going and focusing. But there's really no right way to do the conversation. It's really just a conversation at that point, and really letting the author also get to know me. I'm on the spot just as much as they are, especially if I really love that manuscript. I could be already worried that, someone else might snag it. So it's definitely a two-way street when you hop on the phone.
Well, if I say, hey, I'm talking to another great agent that I heard on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast, and they don't want to make half the changes you do, does that change the conversation a little bit about changes you're willing to make? Or do you stand firm and say, nope, this is what I see for the book, and if we're not there, then I'm not the right fit for you?
Definitely what another agent sees. I think you can approach books different ways. So I'm not so concerned what other agents want to do, but definitely it's more of a conversation of where the author sees it and how they're responding to those changes. And for me, when I give notes, a lot of times it's highlighting a problem, and the solutions I give are just suggestions or a way for an author to springboard from that. So it's not necessarily set in stone, or, it's my way or the highway. So it does, there's not one way, but I definitely, you would have a conversation and kind of see why, where I'm seeing issues in the manuscript and how we can maybe address them in other ways. But it's definitely a dialogue. Edits are a dialogue. Edits are a collaborative experience. And so I'm always open to that, even at the phone call level, or the offer level. We can start there.
Okay, so if you're making suggestions for revision, is that at the phone call level, or does that happen before we get there?
I will usually set up the phone call for the offer, and then we could discuss where I see edits needed. Yeah, I usually don't send them over in an email, just because I think it's easier to walk through them for the reasons you're saying. What if, the author feels really strongly about something? I think it's easier to talk it out and be like, oh, I can see why you're saying that. I can see how it's not translating on the paper. Let's see what else we can do to maybe achieve that. So I think having a dialogue makes it a little bit easier than just an email.
Okay, that makes sense. And then you'll offer even before I've made the changes?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Unless we're doing a revise and resubmit, then in that case, the notes are coming through an email. It's not an offer. It's more of, let's see where we can get this manuscript, if we can get it to a place that I can offer. But if I've offered, you don't need to make the edits till you sign with me.
Okay. Gotcha. But if I get that notice from you that, hey, I would like you to make these revisions, if you do, please resubmit it, I should definitely take that serious, because you're on the fence about making the offer, right?
Yeah, if you're interested in working with me, I hope, you do. I think what authors sometimes do is mistake that for a very fast turnaround. And usually, if it was an easy edit, I would have offered representation, because I'm expecting to do some work. It's a much deeper edit. So I appreciate when authors approach it that way and take the time that's needed. I think they just worry that the offer is going to go off the table, and it never expires. Take the time you need to do the changes and do justice if they match with the vision that you have for your project, and really then send it to me, and then I can evaluate it further.
And then if you're asking me what other projects am I working on, do you want to hear that I've just sent you a middle grade and I have another middle grade? Or would you prefer that I could show you how flexible I am and I've got an adult rom-com that will fit both your needs? I could be the only client you ever need. I can write all of your requests.
No, that's a good question. Really, there's not a right answer. I think what I'm looking for is just, am I an agent that could do your career? Are you, just doing this one middle grade, but you really see yourself, as a finance business expert, and that's really where you see your career, and you're doing this one-off middle grade book? That can kind of just give me a better idea of where I might fit into your career. I don't do finance books. Maybe I can be just your middle grade agent. Or maybe you really need someone who can kind of manage both, and maybe that's not me. So I think it's just more of a conversation of seeing how we fit together. So there's not a right answer. I'm not looking for anything, but more just kind of seeing where we're both at and how we could approach the relationship.
Gotcha. Okay. We get to that point. We've got contracts been signed. I'm working on the revisions. I get them to you. Maybe we go through 3 rounds. What happens next?
We go through 3, so you sign with me, we do the edits, we feel really good about the project. Then comes the submission list, and I'm really transparent with my clients. So I will send who we're doing our first round submission to, the editor's name in the house. And then I will also send you the pitch that I'm actually sending to the editor so you can weigh in. And then we go out on submission, and I will tell you when we go out. I'll tell you what the response is. I'll send you any responses, and then we kind of just go from there, and we're out on submission. And then that process was a little fluid because depending on responses, it can kind of take a shape of its own.
So without getting into too many specifics, because I don't want to put you in a position where you can't answer giving away your secret
I don't want to give all my trade secrets away, but yeah.
But let's say, I don't know, if we do a first round of maybe 3, 5, what's a good first round look like, or is that a trade secret?
I don't know if it's a trade secret. I think it depends on the book and the genre a little bit. But I would say maybe like 10 could be good, 10 to 12. But it kind of depends on the book and the situation.
So if we get, 8 no's and 2 maybes, what do we do then? Do we keep submitting, or are we going to revisit the manuscript? When do you know it's a good idea to revisit the manuscript?
It really just depends how the author's feeling about the feedback, how I'm feeling about the feedback, and what the actual feedback is. I mean, the industry is really, really subjective. A book that sells could have 20 no's behind it, so it's not necessarily we got no's, we need to pull it or change it. But then again, the responses could maybe highlight an issue that we were blind to, and that we do want to adjust before we go wider. So it kind of just depends on the situation and how we see what would make the most sense.
And then if I'm your neurotic client, hopefully I'm completely selling you on the idea that you do not want me for a client over the course of this conversation. But hopefully the ideal client is listening now and is making notes. But where was I going with that? If we're getting no's, is that just you're going to email me, or is it okay if I call you every 2 days and say, oh my God, I'm so nervous, will you just talk to me for a little bit and sing a song so I can breathe? How hands-on are you with your clients? How much interaction can we expect?
I'm pretty hands-on, but I definitely have the philosophy of, put your energy into things you can affect. You can't change how fast an editor is going to read. You can't change how they feel about a book. And if you're tied up, using all this mental power to think about this, you're not really able to work on anything else. So usually my advice when we go on submission is work on your next project and focus on that, because right now it's out of your hands. And I think that's just a better way to use your creative energy. That said, I do just forward responses on with my this is my thoughts on that. And then, I'm always happy to hop on the phone, and that's up to the client if they feel like they need it, if they're fine just reading the feedback. It kind of just depends. I always tell authors, if we ever need to schedule a phone call, just, let me know, and then we'll hop on the phone.
How much is too much? If I want to call you every day, is that too much?
It depends what the situation is. There could be a situation where that warrants it, like we need to talk every day, but I definitely don't think that's always going to be the case. So that might be a lot. But yeah,
I need somebody to live watch Tiger King with me so we can go back. Right. Is that cool?
That might not be where I'm, but maybe that kind of sounds fun. So never say never, So Yeah, I mean, I think just respect that. I think most of my clients are really great in realizing that they are my priority, but I also have, numerous clients. So just to recognize that balance in that, when something's time sensitive, that's going to get my attention. And then when it's their time sensitive thing, that's a good thing because they have all my attention. But sometimes it's going to be someone else's time sensitive thing, and that's where my attention will be for that moment.
Well, and then here's that question I definitely can't ask you because it will absolutely involve your trade secrets. So I want to ask you how you negotiate the contract, how you get that going.
Yeah.
But let's take the two potential scenarios. We get a yes, you're excited about it, I'm excited about it, we're going for it, and nobody says yes. It's back to the drawing board. We're out of places to submit to. What happens in each of those? Where do we go next?
So sorry, what was the first scenario?
First one is we've got a publisher. You've masterfully negotiated a fantastic contract. I'm thrilled with it. You're thrilled with it. The publishers, they wish they didn't have to pay so much money, but they didn't reckon with having to deal with Kristy, the incredible agent. So that once the book is sold and we're moving on, how involved are you in that process? And then let's circle back and say, what do we do if we don't sell the book?
Okay, so in the first scenario. From there, I'm still pretty involved. Like, I like to be copied on things. I get to see your publicity plans. We can discuss that, see, what you should maybe ask about, any sort of question. Especially, I work with a lot of debut authors. So a lot of things are just, is this normal? Is this normal? Should this be happening? And I'm happy to weigh in on that. And so it's kind of helpful for me to be copied because I can see what they're seeing and be like, yes, this is normal. Yes, that's fine. And then in terms of editorial, though, I definitely take a back seat because they're now working with the publisher house and the editor. So I am copied on that, but I don't usually weigh in unless there's any sort of issue. And I think that the relationship between the author and the editor is just as important as that of the author and the agent. So as much as possible, I don't want to be a middleman and be a barrier between that. And tend to step in more when maybe it's something that's easier that comes from me, that maybe is a more sensitive issue, or if there's a problem, then I'm right there having been copied to kind of jump in and be that advocate for my client.
What kind of generic issues having absolutely no relation to any real life scenario with a client you've ever dealt with? But what types of things might come up where you'd feel the need to step in?
Oh, that's a good question. And trying to not name things that are like in my head are all the situations that have come up that are very specific, and I don't want to name those. But just disagreements, things that maybe editorial, but maybe title isn't working, maybe changes to the book that don't feel organic. Maybe their editor just isn't responding quickly and haven't gotten an answer on something we need an answer. I can kind of nudge. It can really be any number of things. But yeah, just there. Usually, publishing is great. Everyone is trying to make the best book possible. And as we said, are in it because they have a passion for it. So it's never like I'm coming in guns blazing, but I think sometimes having an outside person to kind of address an issue can take some of the emotion out of it, and that can kind of lead to a more productive conversation.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And then, okay, so you're staying out of it. You're looking at publicity. What else are you doing in preparation for launch? And what are we doing once we get there?
As an agent, I'm just looking at the plans with the publisher, making sure everything is going smoothly, everything seems to be on time, my author's being looped in, my author's happy with the direction things are going. We start to think about the next project, how we want to approach that. Pretty much all those things. And it really just depends on the author and the project. But any number of things. I'm really there to be the author's guide through the process, especially debut authors who, like I said, everything is new. Just making sure they understand, every step. And if they have any questions, I'm there.
Okay, so now comes time for the next book, follow-up book, which hopefully I'm so responsible I've already half written. But assuming that's not the case, how involved do you like to be? Do you want to spitball ideas for what the book should be with me from that early stage? When do you want to get involved?
I usually get involved pretty early. I'm always happy to hear ideas. Even just like I always say, the hook, just the little pitch that you would, if the book sold, you'd put on Publishers Marketplace. If you want to just run that germ of an idea by me, So I kind of looked in every step of the way. From there, I really like to see like a synopsis and maybe an outline. I think all my authors work in slightly different ways. I tend to have a more organized mind, so that works really well for me to see like a synopsis, to see a chapter outline, to see a first initial pages. I have a few authors that are just complete pantsers, and they're like, I can't do that. I can't fit that mold. And so I kind of work more with their style of how they like to approach it. So it kind of just depends, but I'm always there to hear ideas and kind of see, where I think it could fit into the market.
And then let's say I'm working on it, and I'm not a pantser. I've sent you a full synopsis with an outline with a pitch, and I'm on, I don't know, page 100, and based on my synopsis that if I continue working within 2 to 3 months, I'll be at the full draft. When do you start talking about that book? If you happen to be chatting with an editor who mentions they want exactly that type of book, do you mention my book, or no, do you wait until it's actually finished?
Yeah, you can mention it. So, a little bit, sometimes contracts will have option clauses to not get too specific. So a lot of times your book will be under option, and there's specific windows when that would be submitted. And, they usually have guidelines as to, they want the first 50 pages or the first 6 chapters. So that's a whole different beast, because if the publisher has the option, you have to submit the project to them first, obviously. But let's just say they don't. And let's just say, this is just a second project and we're not considering any other factors that we might consider. But yeah, if I'm meeting with an author, an editor for lunch, and they say they want this, I'm always talking up my author's projects. I don't think it's too early to put that out there and what people might be working on.
So back to the other scenario, every publisher that we send a query to suddenly has a brain parasite, is not thinking straight, and they say no, and we run out of options to submit to. What happens then?
So we have no other options. The book is just not sold. Then we start talking about book number 2 and what we want to do. Your debut book is a hard book to sell. You have no numbers behind you. You have to prove that there's definitely an audience there, against all doubt. So it can be a hard book. So we'll look at what we think went wrong, what we think we can change, and kind of use that to shape our approach for book number 2. And, keep in mind, it's a very subjective industry. There are so many amazing, amazing books that don't find homes. Because if you think about it, how many imprints are there now? How many, books are on a list? That doesn't leave a lot of room. And editors only can pick what they love. And it's just a taste thing. I mean, there's a lot of times books just don't sell. And I always say to authors, imagine going to a bookstore and you can only pick 5 books. That's going to be so different for so many different people. And the books you're leaving behind on the bookshelf aren't necessarily bad. So that there's a little bit of that, just keeping in mind the subjectivity of the industry. But I think also agreeing of what can we do better to, bring up our game and really make sure book number 2 finds a home.
At that point, are you just kind of culling through the rejections you receive, trying to find commonalities between those rejections?
If there are, I think you can drive yourself crazy trying to please everyone. No one book will please everyone, so you shouldn't try. And like I said, there is
Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees.
Right, except for yours, which is perfect. So I think there is a level of balancing that, realizing you can't please everyone, but also realizing these are industry professionals and, their opinion means something. But I do think it's a balance.
And so, okay, we're back to the drawing board. At that point, do you want to be a little bit more involved with what I'm going to be working on? Or is it still going to be just like if we had sold the book, same process for getting ready for the next book?
Probably about the same. I'm pretty involved with my clients at this point. So I'd want to be involved, ideally with the idea, hear what it is. So I would say, yeah, I'd say equal involvement, pretty hands-on there still.
Cool. And then coming up toward book launch, aside from going on fantastic podcast and talking about the pending launching of your clients' books, how involved are you in preparing the book not preparing the book, but preparing me for launch? Are you using your skills as a former book publicist, current marketer, to help me figure out how to position myself and the book to succeed?
I think I more use my skill. I mean, publicity is shifting so much, and what sort of outlets are popular, what outlets exist anymore are shifting. So I'm not really here to be your publicist, but I am here to give you tools to be your best advocate. Because I think, all authors, you have to be your best advocate. And I think I prepare authors for that and what publicity could look like. I think for some authors, you get a huge tour, a huge plan, a huge budget, and that's great. But for a lot of authors, that's just not the case, even if you sign at a big five house. And I think the best thing you can do for publicity, I always used to say as a publicist, is when authors help me help you. And so I really encourage authors to take that into their own hand and, set up book events. If you're a children's author, set up school events, set up library events, and loop your publicist in. Always ask them, what is the best way that they like for you to handle these things. But I think as an author, especially now with bookshelf space shrinking, you have to be your own advocate and look at that not as a negative, but just as a positive, and see yourself as a team with the publisher in a different way. So I think what I really do, knowing that and having been on that other side, is prepare them for that and make sure they have the tools in that regard, rather than being their actual publicist and maybe pitching their books to various outlets.
Well, with the experience you have in book marketing, what are some things you wish every author was doing, just base level, get ready with at least these things to promote your book?
As a publicist, I always say having a website is just so helpful. And it doesn't have to be fancy, but just a way that people can contact you or find out who your agent is. So just have, your name, an email address. I always tell my clients they can list my email address, just the baseline, so that they can get in touch. And I think that is a really useful tool. Nonfiction is going to be so different with your platform. As a fiction writer, do you need a platform on social media? No. I've had authors that have really strong platforms. I have some that have none. Do I think it can be useful? To some extent. I mean, I think it's a great way to connect with, readers and writers. Does it move the needle on sales? I think that's always tough to judge, but I think it can be a useful tool regardless.
Gotcha. Makes sense to me. So, okay, while we're talking about this line, and I'm not going to ever ask you an impossible question like what specific facets of publishing are about to be changed by COVID-19? What in the next 6 months will happen with publishing, with the stock market? Who will be president in 2020? None of those impossible to answer questions, but knowing that there are lots of authors that are filled with anxiety because so many events have been canceled, venues have been shut down, and hopefully just temporary. What things are you advocating for your clients to do to continue to grow their author brand and continue to move books?
I think right now in a pandemic, it's just such an unprecedented time. The first thing I say is, do what you need to do just to preserve your mental health, to preserve yourself. There's nothing you have to do. You just have to survive it. That's step one. And that, is not that easy. It's a really, really soul crushing time for a lot of people. Beyond that, I would say, see where their opportunities are to lift up other writers, work together. Like I said, L'Oreal, she has a virtual launch with another author. And what I've really seen online is just the community coming together, which has been really, really great, of people promoting other people's books that are coming out, people setting up virtual launch events, giving buzz. And I think that's so important. But for writers who are like, what am I going to do? Is publishing going to exist? What I would say is, of course, publishing will exist. Publishing will always exist. I know there's been so many times. I remember someone telling me that when TV was first invented, they were like, this is the end of the book. Who would want a book when you can watch TV? And, it's not the case. It's just such a special thing to hold a book and the escapism that it provides. And I think now more than ever, people are going to be looking for that escape. So I would say for writers, maybe not published authors, but writers who are maybe feeling bad that they're not using this time to write, is to just don't feel bad. I saw this tweet that I really love. It said it's a pandemic, not a productivity contest. And I think that's a really good mentality to have right now, is to figure out what works for you right now and just be fine with that being enough. I think burnout is real in this career. So whatever you can do to preserve that and make sure you don't, you're doing great.
I won't pretend that I'm not doing any writing, because I am, but I am below my usual standard of productivity, and I'm just bearing in mind that, you know what, of concerns that I have for myself, my family, everything that's going on in the world. My next book, still a concern, a little shifted downward in the priorities, and I'm okay with that.
And I mean, some people are thriving, and that's great. I mean, it's an interesting time, but I think also I always tell writers, there's so much to writing that can help craft a story beyond just getting words on a page. You could be reading, some of your favorite comfort reads and kind of thinking back in your head, like, why does this work so well? Like, what is giving it the staying power? What is, I've read it 5 times and I'm still finding myself turning the pages, and you can kind of feel the beats a bit more. Or, maybe you're trying to fall asleep and you're using, a plot and structure book, a nonfiction book to help you do that. You're kind of internalizing some of the lessons there. So I think there's a lot to writing you can be doing that's productive, that maybe, it's great if you're getting stuff on the page, but there's also stuff you could just be doing that you can just check as little wins, and that's great too. As an agent, I'm always an author advocate and would love to see, contract. I mean, that's really what an agent's doing, is always trying to make the most author-friendly contract possible. So, I mean, I think that's great. I think I'd love to see more author-friendly contracts. I'm someone who started my career in publishing, so I have a very soft spot for what publishing houses try to do, and the love that is there. So it's kind of both. But I can definitely understand the frustration, and I definitely would always love to see more author-friendly contracts across the board. That would be great.
What are, if you don't mind me following up, what are some specific things that could happen for contracts to make them more author-friendly?
Just better terms. Contracts are designed by the publisher with the publisher's interest at heart. And the agent's job to really chip away and make sure the author isn't being forgotten in that process.
Kristy Hunter, have you ever seen a flying saucer? Do you believe in them?
I have not seen one. Do I believe in them? I'm typically someone, if I don't see it, I don't believe it. But I think in this case, maybe. I'll say strong maybe.
Well, for all the writers out there who are listening, if there was something, I'll make this our final question for the night. I know it's getting late, and I appreciate you being so incredibly generous with your time and your expertise tonight. What if there was one or two, or however many things you like, that you wish all the authors listening to would hear and take to heart, that would maybe make a difference for their career? What would you tell them?
I think patience. I think that's the overriding thing that authors need to have. I think careers are hard, and there's going to be ups and downs, and it's important just to hang in there and play the long game and work on your craft. And I think that really helps authors reach their goal more than any other gimmick. Just hang in there.
And Kristy, where can esteemed audience find you online, get in touch with you, follow you on Twitter, all that good stuff?
My Twitter handle is Kristy S. Hunter, and information for querying me and everything else can be found on the Knight Agency website, which is www.knightagency.net, and there's a lot of info there too.
And as always, esteemed audience, find me at middlegradeninja.com. Check out that audiobook for the Book of David, Chapter 1. It's going to be a lot of fun. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, etc., etc. Another wonderful episode in the can. Can't wait to share this with the world. Kristy, I always ask our guests to sign us off with the very ninja-like sign-off phrase, hi-ya and what have you. Will you sign us off?
Hi-ya and what have you.